one of which is I picked up a habit of crying during giving speeches. That may yet happen. Wade, it is such an honor to be on the same stage, to be honored the same night as you. Such an honor. And I have to say that I had a similar reaction to yours in thinking about the fact that I was getting this award. I've actually been on the honorary committee for a number of years. Not this year, I guess. But I look back, as you did, at the list of honorees, distinguished people who have gotten this award. First and foremost, of course, Thurgood Marshall, a hero to us all. My good friend Patty Fougere, who's in the back of the room. Eric Holder, Vernon Jordan, the late John Payton, my friend. And now, me. This has got to be the biggest anticlimax. Since I was a freshman in college and saw a banner that said, "For God, for country, and for Yale." I think I have more friends in this room tonight than I've ever had gathered in one room before. I wish I could thank every one of you because I owe you a debt of gratitude. My list of actual names will be short. First, my wife, Roberta, sitting over here. Roberta's Roberta herself is a volunteer legal aid and a distinguished pro bono lawyer in many other areas. And following Wade's example, I feel I must say, although it is in fact the truth, Roberta, I do love you. So many other people I could name, there's obviously not enough time to do it. And most of you, I think you all know who you are. There's a special person right there. But there are a few people here that I do want to call out on this night of all nights. Some of my friends on the senior staff of the Legal Aid Society. People like Beth Harrison, Jennifer Mazie, Julie Becker, Jody Feldman, Lucy Newton, Greg Kelly, Chin Lay, and my dear, dear friend, Eric Angel. Every one of you deserves to be standing at this spot right now, more than I do. But if I can help you in your work by standing in your spot for a few minutes tonight, I am willing to do it. Now, you've all heard a great deal about the work of the Legal Aid Society and our theme of making justice real for people living in poverty. And we come here tonight to celebrate not me, not Wade, not Dan, but the work of the Legal Aid in making that possible. And you might well expect that in my remarks tonight, I would follow Eric by talking about some of the cases that I have worked on in which we were able to obtain the justice that we sought. But I'm not going to do that. In fact, while I have been fortunate enough to have some of those cases, they are not on my mind at all tonight. So instead, I want to tell you about a couple of other cases that are on my mind. The first goes back over 30 years to the time Jim mentioned when I was working as a staff attorney at Greater Boston Legal Services as a landlord-tenant lawyer. One day, a man named Larry came into my office. Larry had 5 children, and his landlord had sued him for eviction. As Larry explained the facts of his situation to me, showed me his documents, it quickly became clear to me that Larry had very solid defenses against this action, and that I should have been able to win the case for him with relative ease, but for one thing. Larry had tried to represent himself first. He had managed to waive all of those defenses, and a judgment for eviction had entered against him and his family, and and he and his 5 children were facing homelessness at any moment. I did the only thing that I could do under the laws of Massachusetts at that time, which was to file a motion in the Boston Housing Court directed entirely to the unfettered discretion of the judge, himself a former legal aid lawyer, asking him to give us a do-over, to remove the judgment, let us start it all over again, and raise those defenses. I explained both the defenses and Larry's personal situation and that of his children at length in the emergency papers that I cobbled together, and I explained them again at the hearing before this judge. And so he knew exactly what he was doing when he looked down at me from the bench and said, "Motion denied." Skipping forward a couple of decades, I and a team of friends at Arnold and Porter led a 10-year-long effort on a different kind of poverty law case, representing a man named David Fisher on Virginia's death row. To be perfectly honest, our legal arguments on David's behalf were not very strong. And yet we fought as hard as we could, first through state habeas, then through federal habeas, the attempt for cert, but inevitably, given the weakness of our case, the day arrived that we all knew in our hearts was coming. The day set for David's execution. And so I drove out to the prison in rural Virginia to spend David's final hours with him, to see what comfort I might be able to bring to him during those hours. As I stood outside his cell, which was right next to the execution chamber, the hours slipped by. At some point, the phone rang at the guard's desk. It was the Supreme Court clerk's office calling with the news that our last-ditch motion for a stay had been denied. Within minutes, the phone rang yet again. This time it was the governor's office, turning down our petition for clemency. So the time ticked away. And a few minutes before the hour set for the execution, a chaplain appeared. And I held David's hand through the bars of his cell as the chaplain administered a final communion. But then the chaplain disappeared and left me with David as I tried desperately to figure out what to say to a man who I knew and who knew himself that he would be murdered in just a few minutes. I told David that I was sorry that we had not been able to win his case for him, but that I thought it had been worth making the fight, even though we had lost. David just stared back at me and said, "Phil, I've been telling you for 10 years that I did not commit this crime. Don't expect a deathbed confession because I'm an innocent man." A moment later, a guard, who I didn't even realize had walked up behind me, tapped me on the shoulder and said the 2 most chilling words that I have ever heard. "It's time." And so I went with the guard, who took me to the viewing area, which is really a part of the execution chamber itself. I found myself separated from David by just a few feet of a pane of glass. By this time, David had been bound tightly to a gurney, strangely in the shape of a crucifix of all things. The only part of his body he could still move was his head as he lay there, twisting his head from side to side, his eyes wide open, scanning back and forth across the ceiling, as if he was determined to take in every last bit he could, while he still could, of this small and ugly little part of the world that was all that was left of him. But at some point, the powerful sedative that they give the condemned before the poison runs into him took effect. His eyes closed, his head grew still. But his chest continued to rise and fall, strongly at first, but then it rose less high and less often, until at last it rose no more. Now, as I said, and as other speakers have said, tonight is supposed to be a night of celebration of the Legal Aid Society and the work that we do for people living in poverty. So why in the world do I tell you these horrible stories? And why indeed do I stand in front of such a large and distinguished audience full of so many of my friends and so many distinguished leaders of the bench and bar and take these few short minutes that I have to tell you all about my greatest failures as a lawyer? Well, there is some method to my madness, because it is these cases, the soul-crushing defeats, more than the victories, more than the feel-good cases, that speak to me about the meaning of poverty law. I was trying to explain this to David Fisher in the final moments of his life when I told him that the fight had been worth it, even though we had lost. I'm afraid he didn't understand me. And I can't blame him, because frankly, I made a hash of my explanation. But since that time, I have come to realize that I do not need to explain why this is true, because someone else, far more eloquent than I, has already done so. And so, if you want to know what poverty law is really all about, here's what you do. I'm going to send you on a field trip, not very far, just to the other side of the Potomac River, to Arlington National Cemetery. It has been said that Arlington is the closest thing that America has to sacred ground. And it is indeed sacred to me, because my parents, two authentic Southern liberals that started me on the path that led to this spot tonight, lie at rest there. But I send you for a different reason. From the visitor center, take the path that leads up the hill towards that big Greek revival mansion. You've all seen it driving along the road. The mansion was built by the step-grandson of George Washington as a tribute to our nation's first president. And it passed from him to his daughter, who married a young Army officer named Robert E. Lee. And indeed, Lee was living in that house in 1861 when he made the single biggest and most tragic mistake in all of American history by turning down Abraham Lincoln's offer to command the Union armies and choosing instead to fight for the most horrible cause for which any American has ever fought. As you approach the mansion, the crowds will all veer off to the right on their way to President Kennedy's grave. Don't go that way. Move instead back to the left. Take the little path that you see there. And there you will see a small, almost insignificant looking white cross, far from all the other graves, and ironically, right smack dab in the center of Robert E. Lee's front yard. That cross marks the grave of one of my greatest heroes, Senator Robert Kennedy. And as you stand before the grave, turn around and look behind you. For there you will see, carved in a stone wall, the words of Senator Kennedy's greatest speech, given in South Africa in 1966, where he had journeyed to speak out against apartheid on South African soil. It was a very grim time in the history of South Africa. The vast majority of the population labored under the twin burdens of a grinding, abject poverty and almost complete deprivation of human rights. Nelson Mandela was still a young man at the beginning of a prison term that had a full generation yet to run. Far more than the toughest poverty law case I have ever seen. Far more, in fact, than in the execution chamber itself. It would have been so easy, so reasonable to conclude that the situation was beyond hope. But Kennedy knew better. He challenged his audience not to give in to the belief that there is nothing that one man or one woman acting alone can do against the combined array of the world's ills. Few will have the greatness to bend history itself, but each time, someone stands up for an ideal or strikes out against injustice or works to improve the lot of others, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each other from a million centers of energy and daring, those ripples form a current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. That is what poverty law is all about. And so, on behalf of the women and men of the Legal Aid Society, servants of justice, one and all, I challenge every single lawyer in this room tonight. Take a poverty law case and send out a ripple of your own. Thank you all very much.